How many times have I been recording an episode and I told myself, wait 30 minutes after you've just eaten or drunk something to record, because otherwise you're going to have a bad time. Yeah. Well, guess who just ate some Taco Bell and then is now immediately recording an episode? This guy. It's Our Weird World.
Our Weird World.
Welcome to Our Weird World. I'm your host, John Henson, and this week, looking at three very mysterious kind of murder events. Not really serial killers because they were just like isolated events, but just some strange killings. We were looking at the Villisca Axe murders, the Hinterkaifeck murders, and the story of the Halifax slasher. So let's jump into it. On June 9th, 1912, the Moore family, which consisted of the father, Josiah, who was 43, Sarah, the mother, who was 39, and then their four kids, Herman, 11, Mary Catherine, 10, Arthur, 7, and Paul, 5. And they were going out to attend a Children's Day service at the local Presbyterian church in Villisca, Iowa. And Villisca, very, very, very small town in the southwestern corner, just out in the middle of nowhere, just nothing but cornfields, part of Iowa, which I get is mostly Iowa, but this is like extra corny, I guess. After the service, the family of 6, along with 2 members of the Stillinger family, Ina Mae and Lena, who were both 12 years old, friends of Herman and Mary Catherine, they were going to go spend the night with the Moores, and so all 8 left the church and went home, and that was the last time any of them were seen alive. The next day, the Moore's neighbor, Mary Peckham, got a little concerned after no one had come out for their morning chores. And guys, it was already past 7 a.m. Man, rural Iowa in the early 1900s, very different place than it is now. But it's also that's farm life. You know, you get started at 5, 6 in the morning, doing whatever needs to be done on the farm. And you do that for any period of time consistently, and all of a sudden your neighbor, because you don't live in an actual cul-de-sac or anything, but your neighbor will notice. And Mary, being the nosy little lady that she was, went over, knocked on the door. Obviously no one answered. And so she tried to just let herself inside, because that's not I love how that's just such an insane behavior now. If I don't see my neighbors for 2 weeks, whatever, dude, I just they're dead probably, but I'm going to let someone else figure that out. I'm not going to go walk over to their house and try to go inside their house. Not going to do that. But the door was locked. So she called Ross Moore, who was Josiah's brother. But before doing that, she went around back and let out the Moore's chickens. Just let them out of their cage, I guess, because that's what you do. Free range chickens or whatever. I don't know. Farm stuff. But Ross, he had a copy of the key to the house, so he let himself inside. He walked into the parlor, didn't really see anything weird, and then he walked over to the guest bedroom where he found both of the Stillinger girls were very, very, extremely dead. Not just they died in their sleep. No, they were extremely dead. Very obviously dead. And you'll see why here in a second. He quickly ran back out, told Mary to call Villisca's peace officer, Hank Horton, to come over and help him kind of figure out what was going on. Hank arrived a few minutes later, searched the house, and came back out and found that basically everyone had been bludgeoned to death with Josiah's axe. Doctors quickly came in, they examined each body and concluded that the murders had taken place around 5 a.m. And investigators then found 2 cigarettes in the attic, And no one in the Moores family smoked. They certainly weren't going up and sneaking up into the attic to smoke. So they kind of got this idea that the killer was waiting there until the family was all asleep. Of course, though, because it was Josiah's axe, people logically thought that Josiah had snapped and had murdered everyone. But actually, and also, like, for starters, it didn't account for like the fact that Josiah was also bludgeoned to death with the axe. So, like, he wasn't going to do it himself. The thing about it was that it appeared as though Josiah and Sarah were the first ones to be murdered. Even more, Josiah was just bludgeoned and beaten way more than anyone else in the house. And whoever murdered them also used the blade of the axe on Josiah, and only Josiah. Everyone else got the blunt end. And so that seemed pretty strange. Investigators were kind of able to piece together a trail of events. And so they ultimately surmised that, like, after Josiah and Sarah were killed, the killer then went into the children's rooms and killed all of the children before then returning to the master bedroom to bludgeon the parents more. And then before they left, they then found the Stillinger sisters and killed them. They believed that everyone had been completely asleep when they were killed, perhaps with the exception of Lena Stillinger, who was found lying across the bed and had kind of a defensive wound on her arm. So, like, that's got to be horrifying. Like, you're just in this house and you hear everyone get murdered by this person. Guy comes in, kills your sister, and then now you're wide awake and you're trying to fight this guy off. Not very well because she died, but you get it. No one had any idea who had committed these murders, but police quickly came up with several suspects. All right. The first was this guy named Andy Sawyer, who was just kind of this transient who had showed up to the Burlington Railroad at 6 a.m. on the morning of the murders and asked for a job. When he showed up, he was wearing a brown suit. His shoes were strangely covered in mud, and his pants were wet all the way up to his knees. Even stranger, Sawyer was intensely fascinated by these murders. And he often was just asking around. He asked police, he asked people around town if they had found the killer yet. Thomas Dyer, who gave Sawyer the job at the railroad, also kind of noted that, like, Sawyer was always sleeping with an axe, which is, again, very strange behavior, very, very odd given the context of all these murders. Dyer's son claimed that Sawyer even showed him in great detail how the killer would have escaped the Moores home without ever being seen, which I don't know how you know that. However, it was determined that Sawyer had actually been arrested in Osceola, Iowa, which was 70 miles east of Villisca on the night of the murders. And basically he had been put on a train by the local sheriff to get him out of town, which made it highly improbable that he would have even been in Villisca that night, because that rail line, I don't think, went through Villisca. It was going from Osceola to Burlington, and it's just, the way the direction is, it's just not that. Another suspect was Frank Fernando Jones, who was an Iowa State senator who had employed Josiah Moore before he left to start his own business that ultimately became more successful and ended up taking business away from Jones. So, like, he hires Josiah. Josiah works for this guy for a little bit of time. Then Josiah leaves, starts a business that then becomes more successful than Jones's business. And so some people believe that Jones had hired a guy named William Blackie Mansfield to murder the family because Mansfield was actually the prime suspect in a series of other axe murders in Paola, Kansas that had occurred 4 days before the Villisca murders. Even more, Mansfield had already been known to have killed his wife, his infant child, and his in-laws with an axe 2 years later in Illinois. So he commits these axe murders in Kansas. 4 days later, the Villisca murders occur. And then 2 years later, he ends up killing his family. Even more, Mansfield was ultimately connected to axe murders in Colorado Springs, Colorado, Ellsworth, Kansas, and the famous New Orleans axe murders. So if you guys aren't aware, there's a famous story of an axe murder in New Orleans around this time. I think it was a little bit later on, but around this time where, this guy just ran around town at night, kind of bludgeoning people to death with an axe. And it got so notorious that he would write into the local papers, and basically like one of his final threats was just like, any house that's not playing jazz is going to get attacked. And so like the way the story goes is just like every house that night was playing jazz music. And like there's a season of American Horror Story that was kind of centered around this story. But yeah, it was all connected around, William Mansfield. James Wilkerson, a detective with the Burns Detective Agency of Kansas City, claimed that he could prove that Mansfield was present in each of the cities on the night of these murders, and that each murder was carried out in the same way. Although Mansfield was arrested and brought to Kansas to face trial for the Ellsworth axe murders, payroll records submitted during that trial indicated that he was actually in Illinois at the time of the Villisca murders. And due to that, and just an overall general lack of evidence, Mansfield was allowed to go free and even sued Wilkerson for the entire ordeal. And Mansfield actually ended up winning the suit and was awarded a little over $2,200. Here's the thing, though. All right. So it wasn't those guys. All right. But we have the answer for sure. Totally. 100%. In 2017, baseball historian Bill James claimed that he had figured it all out. Right? He believed that a man named Paul Mueller, a German immigrant, had gone around the country following an 1897 murder of a West Brookfield, Massachusetts family who had originally employed him as a farmhand. James connected Mueller to the same axe murders that Mansfield was connected with, and a bunch more. In all right, this guy, Bill James, believes that Mueller's decade-long crime spree across the country resulted in 59 deaths in at least 14 different murder events. All right. Police, however, have not looked into this at all because Paul Mueller, not a real person. No record of anybody named Paul Mueller who worked in Massachusetts, who was living anywhere else at any remotely similar time. So I don't know. Who knows? The only person actually who was ever tried for the Villisca axe murders was a guy named George Kelly, who was a traveling minister who had been accused of peeping and asking young girls to pose nude for him. And he was actually the preacher at the church the Moores attended on the night of the murders. And Kelly had actually left town around the time the murders were committed. And Kelly actually confessed to the murders, but due to a diagnosed mental illness, no one actually believed him. And he was ultimately acquitted after 2 trials, which, like, why are you inviting? Oh, actually, no, that's a stupid question. Of course, you're going to invite a mentally ill person to, preach at a church because, you wouldn't give him a chance. So whatever. To this day, though, no one knows who committed the Villisca axe murders. But the town of Villisca has capitalized on this story. They are happy to show you the house, that you can go inside, take tours. You can see how everyone was killed. It is basically the main sort of income generator for the town outside of like corn and stuff. So, no one really knows, who ended up doing that. And all of the credible leads, ended up getting acquitted or whatever. Next, we're going to the Hinterkaifeck murders. And Hinterkaifeck was a small farm built in 1863 near the village of Groburn, roughly 40 miles north of Munich, Germany. The farm was occupied by the Gruber family, which included these names here. Cajilia, who was 72, Andreas, who was 63, Victoria, 35, another Cajilia, who was age 7, who was Victoria's daughter, and then another a son, a 2-year-old son named Joseph. But in September of 1921, the Gruber's maid abruptly quit, claiming that she was hearing strange sounds in the attic and that the house was haunted. In March of 1922, Andreas found a newspaper from Munich on the property, which was strange considering like no one in the immediate area subscribed to that particular newspaper. He also discovered tracks in the snow that led from the forest behind the farm up to a broken door lock on the farm's machine room, but there were no tracks leading away from that machine room. It was just one way, just come right out of the woods into the machine room and then nothing leading out. On March 31st, 1922, everyone except 2-year-old Joseph was lured out to the barn where they were murdered one at a time with a pickaxe. The killer then walked into the house, found Joseph and the family's new maid Maria, and killed them both with the same pickaxe. Unlike Iowa, 5 full days passed before someone realized that something wasn't right. On April 4th, Albert Hoffner, who had gone to Hinterkaifeck to make some repairs to the family's food chopper, told the daughters of the village guide, Lauren Schlittenbauer, about how like things felt pretty weird over at Hinterkaifeck. Like he had gone and made these repairs. He'd been on the property for like 5 hours and just didn't see anyone. Like no one came to greet him. No one talked to him. And that was really strange. Schlittenbauer then sent his son and his stepson over to Hinterkaifeck to try to make contact, to see what was going on. When the boys failed to find anyone, Schlittenbauer himself went over and found the 4 bodies in the barn before then finding the other 2 bodies inside. Investigators were called in from Munich, and they had a hard time analyzing the situation properly because by the time they got there, several people had come in and tampered with the crime scene, even going so far as to cook entire meals in the Gruber's kitchen. Like, what's going on in Germany where you have this gruesome murder scene and you just have like gawkers and onlookers coming in and be like, oh yes, I'm very hungry. There's a very full kitchen right here. I will go make a meal for myself. Like, no, why are you doing that? Anyway, the local physician, Johann Baptist MUELLER, performed autopsies on the bodies and determined that the younger Cajilia had initially survived the blows to his head with the pickaxe and had actually pulled out several tufts of her own hair in agony, which that's brutal. Like, to be in so much pain that you're pulling out your own hair. And I don't know why you're doing that. Rather than like, I don't know, crawling to get help, but whatever. I don't know, man. Germans. Investigators quickly realized also that whoever had committed the murders had actually stayed on the property for a couple of days afterward. Like the cattle had been fed, large amounts of bread and meat were missing from the pantries. Neighbors even reported seeing smoke from the chimney during the days following the murder. So like, that's a ballsy move to like go onto this family's farm, murder the entire family, and then just like decide to keep the farm going. Like keep feeding the cattle, let the chickens out or whatever if they're doing that, like just making their own meals and enjoying a nice fire. Like that takes some real balls to do that. They also couldn't understand, like investigators really couldn't understand like what drew the Grubers out to the barn to begin with. The bodies, when they found them, were arranged side by side in the barn, as evidenced, like to show that like they were tampered with after they were dead. Like the guy murdered them and then arranged the bodies like side by side. Investigators kind of assumed that the killer was on the premises for some time during the murders, but the only evidence they initially found was a small area of shifted roof tiles and indentations in the hay of the barn, like out where they got murdered. However, and this was a nice little wrinkle to the story. This spot was actually later determined to be a hiding spot where Andreas and Victoria were having incestuous relations with each other because of course. So like, I don't know if I like kind of cleared that up, but like basically Cagilia and Andreas. So that was like the patriarch matriarch. Cagilia was the grandmother at this point. Andreas was the father. Victoria was their daughter. All right. So Victoria getting it on in the barn with her dad. Cool. Police initially wondered if Victoria's husband, Carl Gabriel, had committed the murders as revenge for Victoria birthing Joseph with her own father. Nice. Which, like, and honestly, like, that seems pretty plausible, totally understandable. But Carl had actually been killed in Arras, France during World War I in 1914. So, you know, this happened 8 years later. So pretty sure it wasn't him. His body, however, was like never recovered. So that kind of led some people to speculate that he actually hadn't died, but had just defected to Russia, because he had told a lot of people that he had a desire to just go to Russia one day. So obviously, guys, he faked his own death to defect to Russia, to then come back to Germany, to murder his entire family because his wife was getting it on with his father-in-law. Makes perfect sense. And like police, like regardless of what the truth was, like police had no possible way of proving whether or not Gabriel was or was not involved because there was no actual recovery of his body during World War I. It was all, you know, just what people were saying. Lawrence Schlittenbauer, the village guide, he was also suspected mainly because the initials LS were written on Joseph's birth certificate, which I don't know. Maybe. Police were also curious as to why or how he had a key to the Hinterkaifeck house and why he just walked in by himself on the day the bodies were discovered. Some people said that Schlittenbauer had told him he was looking for his sons to go and try and track them down. And whether or not that was true, he did disturb the crime scene inside, which made it really difficult for investigators to figure out what was going on. Many people, and because of that, like many people in Groburn believed that Schlittenbauer was the murderer, mostly because he kept saying a lot of weird things to make people think he was. Like he would make comments about how the ground was too frozen to bury bodies on the night of the murders, how, just weird stuff like that. Up until his death in 1941, Schlittenbauer actually sued several people for slander and won several claims against people who had called him the murderer of Hinterkaifeck. So, whatever. However, we know who did it. All right. Paul Mueller back, Bill James was like, hey guys, it was Paul Mueller. I know this. All right. How do you know this, Bill? Well, because the crimes at Hinterkaifeck and Villisca were very similar, namely that they both used an axe, Bill James actually, like, he truly did suspect that Mueller had done this because he was a German immigrant, like I mentioned before, and he had gone back to Germany after his killing spree in the United States to keep killing people. And again, police have not bothered to investigate this at all because it's completely stupid. All right. Without any real idea for a motive, police kind of just began rounding up people who might remotely be considered a suspect. Over 100 people were questioned about the murder, but the case was never solved, and the files were just closed in 1955, and no one knows who actually did it. Our final story here is of the Halifax slasher, when on November 16th, 1938, Mary Gledhill and Gertrude Watts claimed that a man with bright buckles on his shoes attacked them with a mallet. 5 days later, Mary Sutcliffe was attacked. And by the time Hilda Lodge was attacked on November 25th, there had been so many other reports of attacks in England that Scotland Yard and various vigilante gangs were roaming the streets of Halifax looking for the attackers. So it's Halifax, England. And, someone just out attacking a lot of women. No one knows who's doing it. Scotland Yard's getting involved. Clifford Edwards, who joined one of the gangs vigilante gangs and responded to Hilda's attack, was actually accused of being the Halifax Slasher, which was this name that was given to the mysterious attacker. Edwards was quickly cornered by the mob, who then began chanting for his death. Police quickly swooped in to escort him home before anything else happened, and he wasn't the guy. He was actually part of the vigilante gang looking up, and then someone was just like, hey, maybe it's this guy. And then everybody's like, sure, why not? Kill him. By now, the people of Halifax were scared, completely scared, and wondered actually if James Leonard, who had been convicted of several slasher attacks in 1927, had returned to do some more slashing. However, none of the victims claimed that their attacker had a big nose, which was Leonard's most easily identifiable characteristic, so he was thrown out. Over the next week, several other people reported attacks in Halifax, as well as the nearby towns of Manchester and Bradford. On November 29th, Percy Waddington, who had reported an attack earlier that day, just kind of admitted that he had attacked himself. And Percy's admission of that brought others forward who had claimed attacks to then admit the same thing. So now it's like, well, how many people really were getting attacked versus people just faking it for attention, which tends to happen a lot in England. Scotland Yard immediately then closed the investigation and charged 5 people with public mischief, sending 4 of them to prison, one of which was Paul Mueller, who was finally caught, and he confessed to all the axe murders. And it was all true. And Bill James became just a hero for a very short amount of time. Like, oh my God, Bill, I know that you are super into baseball. How did you know about this Paul Mueller guy? And Bill was just like, I just had a hunch, and all of the evidence was there. Like, he was in Boston and I knew him because I knew this family. And then I knew that when they died, I knew Paul was the one that did it. And then because I knew he liked axes, he chopped all their firewood. And then I started seeing all of this happen. He carried an axe everywhere he went, you guys. And I just all over Villisca, Kansas City, New Orleans, the other places, Colorado Springs that I mentioned. And he just went on this rampage. And I knew he was a German immigrant. And I knew that eventually he would get tired and he would feel like the police in America were coming to get him. So he would just go back to Germany. That's his homeland. And then he killed those people. He just walked right out of the woods in Hinterkaifeck, murdered all those people with the axe. And then, because he couldn't help himself, he had to get on a boat and a train and whatever they had in the 1930s and go to England and Halifax. And he started swiping at people with his axe. And some people were like, oh no, we gotta get whatever. And Paul was just like, finally, his conscience finally got to him, because deep down, Paul Mueller was a good guy. And finally, his conscience got to him. And he finally confessed. And he's like, yes, I'm the Halifax Slasher. And I'm also the New Orleans Axeman. And I'm also the Villisca Axe Murder. And I'm also the Hinterkaifeck Murder. And that's how... No, none of that's true. Paul Mueller was actually not connected to this at all. I thought it was funny that he would be. Because, it kind of lines up. I mean, it's 1938. It's not that much farther removed from Villisca and Hinterkaifeck, but whatever. All right, we're done with the stories today. There you go. A little true crime, a little mystery. I know for people who enjoy a lot of closure in their stories that there wasn't a lot here. But I don't know, man. It was Paul Mueller. All right, just go ahead and run with that. It was this international super killer who never got caught. Of course, no. Let's wrap it up and see what we learned today.
What did we learn?
Number 1, the town of Villisca, Iowa is super, super into the gruesome murder of an entire family that happened one night in the early 1900s. You can go there, tour the house. You would have to go way out of your way to go visit this place. But hey, look, if you're on a road trip through the Midwest, you're looking for stuff to do, check out the Villisca Axe Murder House. All right. Number 2, the Halifax Slasher may have just been a bunch of people faking it for attention. Seems reasonable. And number 3, Paul Mueller, not a real person. All right. No record of his existence. All right. I'm sure there have been a bunch of Paul Muellers in the past, but not one who lived in Massachusetts and then traveled around the country axe murdering a bunch of people. It's complete nonsense. Next week on Our Weird World, we are going to Texas. Got several kind of paranormal tales from Texas, mostly in the mid to late 1800s. What was going on in Texas during this time? Who knows? We're going to find out. Probably just a bunch of urban legends, really. But 5 stories. 5 stories from Texas. We're going to look at the stories of the Converse werewolf, the donkey lady, the hairy man, the servant girl annihilator. Maybe it's another Paul Mueller. And then also a strange event that happened in the town of Aurora, Texas. All of that happened in the 1800s. So we will look at those stories next week. And that's going to do it. Thank you all for listening. Keep telling all your friends and keep it weird.